MBA Students Association and the Alumni Office. I'm grateful to each one of you for being here. At the outset, let me wish you a very happy holiday season. And although the title of our talk is Why the Holidays Suck and Survival Tips, hopefully you will all have a joyous and wonderful holiday season. Take a moment to notice that things are so different this year with the unfortunate global pandemic. Many of us will be sad because we are not able to spend time with loved ones, that you look forward to in our busy lives. It's usually during the holidays that we have those moments of reconnection, and we are going to be deprived of them. But by the same token, many of us are going to be relieved that we don't have to go and be with some of the relatives and family members that we find intolerable on one account or the other. So in this session, I would be just sharing with you a few of the survival tips that we possibly can use at this time during the holiday season. So the title of the talk is Why the Holidays Suck. So I would imagine that not many of you are interested in theories about why the holidays suck, but you're interested more in looking at how do we get beyond a state of consciousness where we are trapped in thinking that the holidays suck. So let me start off with a very simple and favorite metaphor of mine. I have never known to do a presentation without bringing my friend Curious George into the picture. He goes wherever I go and he's always with me. And the chattering monkey is of such central importance in looking at life because the voice in our inner head that is talking to us constantly, that's making up stories and that's making up interpretations is what gives us the quality of our experience. So I want to start off with a real Thanksgiving story from about 2 years ago when we would get together with families, and I had spending Thanksgiving with our family and had an uncle of mine who dropped in a few minutes late, and I was okay with that. Gradually, I had started moving some heavy furniture in the room. And as I kept moving this heavy furniture, I noticed that he didn't seem to be rising or offering to help or saying anything like that. It was at that moment that the voice in my inner head started talking to me, and it said, he is so unhelpful. He's so unhelpful. Look at him. Uncle David is not even helping to move any of the furniture. That's so mean of him. He's so unhelpful. And then, of course, I had made a dish which was like a hybrid between an Indian and an American recipe, my own homespun recipe of a Thanksgiving vegetable side dish. And I was waiting to be complimented. He had it and he didn't seem to have much of a reaction. And I was waiting and he didn't say anything while all the other guests seemed to say, oh, wow, this is so cool. This is so neat. I'd never tried something like this before. And he just said, this is interesting. And I said, he's so unappreciative. And then as luck would have it, the dish of mashed potatoes slipped a little while we were passing it around the table, and some of it spilled on the floor. He spilled a little of it on the floor. Of course, I rose with my napkin and my mop to clean it up, and he didn't even move, offer to clean it up or do anything. And I said, he's so mean. Notice within a fraction of a second is all it takes for the chattering monkey, which is the voice in our head, to start making up stories and interpretations. And in an instant, my uncle goes from being a valued and honorable guest to being somebody who, A, becomes unappreciative, and as we have talked before in previous presentations, our mindfulness comes from our ability to see how our interpretations start coloring our experience of the situation and of reality. So my uncle now becomes somebody who did not help me move the furniture, so he's unhelpful, who didn't think much of my homegrown recipe of the side dish. He's unappreciative, so now he's unhelpful and unappreciative, and he didn't rise immediately to clean up and mop up the mashed potatoes that he had spilled on the floor, so he's mean. So all of a sudden, I see this gentleman as being somebody who's unhelpful, mean, and unappreciative. And all of a sudden, that Thanksgiving becomes an intolerable situation because I'm in the presence of somebody who's unhelpful, mean, and unappreciative. Now, there might have been 100 reasons why he ended up being that way. And it turned out that he was not well. He had other things going on, but the chattering monkey is sometimes relentless, which brings me to the Sunday op-ed piece that is coming out this Sunday in the cleveland.com. I'd encourage all of you to read it. It's a special op-ed piece that I wrote on how our mind is sabotaging us. How does your mind sabotage you? And this is a very interesting thing, because the fundamental aspect of with the wisdom traditions in the East is that the first step that we have to take in order to grow spiritually is to understand that the mind is like a machine, that our minds operate like machines. They're highly predictable. They make up stories, they make up interpretations, and those stories and interpretations become our reality. So the effort of the Eastern wisdom traditions has been to make us vigilant and aware of how those interpretations are constantly coming up. So I want to give you 4 pointers from based on the column on how is your mind sabotaging you that could apply to your Thanksgiving and your Christmas holidays. The first, what is your mind's unique strategy for making you unhappy? So I want each of us to reflect that each of us has developed our own unique formula. When everything is going so well and life seems perfect and beautiful, there would be something we are likely to do or say that suddenly, sends us crashing into unhappiness. I bet several of you have noticed that. You know the expression in English, it seems too good to be true? Why do we say that? Because when things are going so well and everything seems perfect, there's a gnawing suspicion, a nagging voice within us that says, this can't be real. This is too good to be true. And so, what's our mind's unique strategy for making us unhappy? What is our mind's dance with sadness, anger, fear, and anxiety? I would put it to you that based on our childhood experiences, each of us has a favorite emotion that tends to dominate us during the day. For some of us, it's an enduring sense of sadness. For others of us, it's a sense of anger. For others of us, it's a sense of fear. And for some of us, it's anxiety. I would invite you to consider that one of these 4 basic emotions often stays with us as a lasting feeling. Just as we say, what's the weather like outside? If we were to do an inner weather report on what's the weather like inside, sometimes we feel that one of these emotions is our dominant state. And you will notice that your mind will constantly tempt you with thoughts, with stories and interpretations to bring us back to that favorite emotion of ours, whether it's sadness, anger, or fear. So remember this as you go through the holidays. If you find yourself in one of these moods, try to understand, is it that your mind is producing stories and interpretations that would submerge you, in your favorite emotion, which might be sadness, anger, fear, or anxiety? It requires an ability for us to be reflective. The Indian mystic Osho also talked about the mind as a bottomless begging bowl. It's the idea that the mind, human mind, operates like a machine, and part of that machine is that it's a bottomless begging bowl. What do we mean by that? The mind asks for things, and the universe might give it to us. Once we attain something that we desire, whatever it is that we have attained appears to have completely lost its value. Because it's a bottomless begging bowl, the gift of the universe falls into it. We appreciate it for a fleeting moment, and before we know it's gone, it has passed through the bottomless begging bowl, and our begging bowl is again empty. Notice the extent to which many of us are wandering through life, focusing our attention on what it is that we don't have than what it is that we have had. Like, think of all the thousands of our desires that have been satisfied, that have actually come true. Seldom do we think and spend time feeling grateful for all those things that happened that we wished that would happen. Our cup is always half empty as we look at what it is that we don't have. Another aspect of the mind is that it works like a pendulum. Notice your mind, it's always thinking about the future. Now, it might be fantasizing about a rosy future or freaking out about a doomsday, one of the two, or it's in the past. Notice that the pendulum of the mind is dwelling on the past and dwelling on the future. And Eastern mystics have always pointed out that it's ironic that we spend all our time in the future or the past, but notice that life is always happening to us in the present. Life never comes to us as future. When it arrives and you encounter life, it's always in the present. But the irony is that the mind is always in the future and mind is always in the past. And therefore, one of the things that we do is to bring ourselves back through mindfulness and meditation to this moment, because in this moment, you might be warm, you might be where, you might have eaten. There are little things that you could feel grateful for in this moment. And in this moment, there is no stress, tension, or anxiety. Most of those stresses that we feel are given by an imaginary future or a past that we have lived. There's another existential conundrum that we have to confront when we try to understand the mechanism of our own mind. And that is this. Notice this. The mind is always looking for what you don't have. The mind is always focused on what it is that I don't have, that I'm seeking. But happiness only comes from what I have. So, do you see the gap there? If I'm focusing, constantly striving for what I don't have, but happiness as an experience, contentment as an experience, bliss and joy as an experience always come from what we have, there is a gap. And in that gap, we are always floundering in a state of anxiety and tension. So the first tip that I would say in terms of having your holidays not suck so much is to understand the ways in which your mind could be sabotaging you, and to enable you to have that level of mindfulness that you could really start looking for how the way the stories that you're making up, the interpretations that you're making up, the emotions that you might be surrounding yourself with. Now, there is another point that I want to bring up, which is fascinating, and I often think about it. It is about the nature of existence, it is the nature of experience. It's the idea that contrasts are very necessary for us to value something. Contrast, the centrality of contrast. What do I mean by that? We know that we appreciate the goodness in the world. But do you realize that goodness exists and has value only because there is evil too? If there was no evil, we would not appreciate goodness. We would just take it for granted. Similarly, we appreciate health because there is something like sickness. We appreciate generosity because there's something like meanness. We appreciate something that's entertaining and engaging because there's something that's absolutely boring. Notice that so much of our life is given meaning by the contrasts that we have. You're warm and you appreciate a warm fireplace because you were cold. You appreciate water and quenching your thirst because you were thirsty. So there's a dialectic to our experience. So some aspects of our life seem like they totally rock, but can you see that some aspects or dimensions of our life seem to rock because there are other aspects that seem to suck? So once we understand this, we begin to not fight the darkness, because you know that the darkness is what is there that makes light beautiful. When the sun rises in the morning with all its beautiful hues, it is because it provides a contrast to the darkness. Now, I'm a college professor. I write on the blackboard sometimes. Still, I do, just for the love of it. Do you notice that the letters that I write are written in white on a blackboard? And it's the contrast that provides for illumination, for enlightenment, for education, and all of that. So it is an embracing of the totality of our experience. Now, I know that many of us have fallen into something called perfectionism, when in perfectionism, you want to be perfect, and we start waging a war with any aspect of us that we don't like, that's not perfect. And we start waging a war with any aspect of life itself that doesn't seem to fit in to how we would like it to be. We have expectations, and when those expectations are not fulfilled, we are really upset. But notice how, when you embrace, says Osho, the paradigm of totality and not perfection, you're embracing the imperfect as part of the perfect. Excuse me, because without the imperfection, there would be nothing like perfection. It's the same idea that you cannot enjoy the peaks of a mountain if you were to go hiking unless there was also a valley, because the valley has to be there for you to enjoy the peak. So remember, therefore, that if you go through phases of your life and your holiday totally sucks, you know that that is actually how you could also find the redeeming features of it, the ones that rock. For example, imagine that you have a particularly conflict-ridden family. I wouldn't wish that on you. I wish a very accepting family on you. But let us say that you have no control over that. Sometimes you are dealt out a deck of cards and you have particularly conflict-ridden family dynamics. If you're in it for a day, and then you come back to be with yourself, to be alone, you will appreciate the value of aloneness so much more. And even though the family, by its absence, has shown its value. So it's a very deep paradigm of embracing the totality, because you know that it is the light, the darkness that gives meaning to the light. It is the evil that actually makes the good beautiful. So this stands at some way in the background, can always help us, deal with challenging situations. The next parable or metaphor that I want to introduce is that of the tall trees, the paradox of the tall trees. Now, Osho, the Indian mystic, he left behind a legacy of over 2,000 books, reminds us of the paradox that the tall trees that you see and admire are very tall. Their branches seem to be reaching out to the skies and to the heaven itself. But notice that the taller the tree, the deeper its roots. So that is so interesting. The higher you reach, into outer space, into the heavens, into the land of wisdom, the deeper your roots have to be. Now, why am I sharing this metaphor to you? Because there is a particular challenge that the Zen masters dealt with, that we talk about wisdom, we crave for experiences of lovingness, compassion, wisdom, all the beautiful things, the spiritual states of being that we would desire for ourselves. But the reality is that for most of the day, you're lost in the marketplace, where you have to be strategic, you have to be calculating, you have to make your chess moves in a smart way. Or you're lost in family, where still there is politics, there's tension, there's all of these things. So how do as a human being deal with this? The reality that on a day-to-day basis there seems to be so much tension, politics, and all the worldly suffering that is there. And on the other hand, the human being also has an imagination capable of imagining beautiful things: love, compassion, acceptance, joy, wisdom, bliss. So we have the capacity to imagine these states of being, but then the realities that we seem to be involved in are so far remote. Folks, just to make sure that the few of you who have your cameras on have not completely fallen asleep, how many of you are aware of this duality on a moment-to-moment basis every day? Could you raise your hand? Thank you. It's always with us. So the mystics, like the Zen masters, have told us, like, some people have retreated to the Himalayas and the Alps, and they've said, I can't put up with this shit. I'm just going to go and meditate, and I'm going to become a hermit, and I'm going to become a recluse, and I'll run for the hills, to use the title of a song by Iron Maiden. Okay. But then there are others who have said, no, I want you to be here in the marketplace, but not off the marketplace. I want you to be here in all the worldly distress that you're suffering, but simultaneously be able to access higher states of being. So to keep your feet firmly planted on the ground of everyday struggles. Okay, so not to run from the world of everyday struggles, because after all, this is what makes life beautiful. You know, imagine without our struggles, if life was just unending bliss, we would go crazy. Okay, the ups and downs is what gives us the infinite spices and fragrances. Somebody likened life to opening your spice cabinet. There are 50 different spices, some of you which you hate, some of which you love. Some people, Osho has likened life to a rose. It has the petal, it has the fragrance, it has the beauty, but then it has the thorns. So to deal with this duality, I have been practicing a simple technique that has worked enormously for me. I have my feet firmly on the ground, and I will engage with the everyday struggles. But I know that my head can be held in the sky. I can inhale the wisdom of the heavens. I can feel the fragrance of the sky, of the tall trees, of the clouds. So it is being able to maintain a, a higher level perspective on life struggles, which enables us, you see, you get into an argument in that moment, to be able to access the wisdom from the heavens and say, you know what, I need to bring compassion to this fellow human being. We don't know what his life has been like. We don't know what his day has been like. So those kinds of uplifting perspectives, and the idea, the duality of having your feet planted on the ground and your head in the sky, captures that duality very well. I also want to share another parable of the Buddha. the Buddha, the wise man from the East, the founder of Buddhism. So the story goes that there's a man who came to him and said, you know what? I have fallen in love with humanity and I want to save humanity. I want to save humanity. How do I do that? So the Buddha turned to him and said, I'm so happy that you have come to this place of altruism where you want to help and save everybody. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to hear a little more about your neighbor and how are things between you and your neighbor. And that man went, my neighbor, he's such an asshole. I don't want to talk about him. And the Buddha said, he stopped him right there. He said, don't think about humanity. Humanity is an abstraction. It's easy to love people in the abstract. It is very hard to love people in the concrete. So let's focus on your neighbor and do an experiment, work with that relationship with your neighbor and see how you can bring a little bit of compassion and joy and bliss to that. And once you've done that, come back to me and we will talk about how we can, save humanity. It's a gentle reminder to each of us that the most difficult relationships that we have are not with the mass of humanity. Humanity has never been a problem. The problem is the most intimate relationship is the first one we have to deal with, which is the relationship with ourselves. That is often fundamentally broken because we have an internal condemner that is constantly condemning us, that is telling us you have not done enough, you have not been enough, which has made it impossible for us to enjoy our leisure. Because imagine if you were in the holidays to just sit back and start enjoying your leisure, you will notice that in half an hour, your mind will tell you to be more productive. So there's that internal condemner. And I put it to you that humanity as it is today has three major challenges, especially as you go into the holiday season. And the three major challenges is that we've made it very hard for ourselves to enjoy people. We've made it very hard for ourselves to enjoy leisure. And we've made it very hard for ourselves to enjoy the intangible. We're always looking for tangible. These are three major challenges. So let's look at the challenge of leisure itself. So I want to distinguish between cultures that see space. So you go into a room, you see a lot of space. How do you relate to that space? In a culture like the Western culture where doing is very important, when you see space, we want to fill it up with material objects. We want to bring in furniture. We want to bring in things. The same thing holds true for our social schedule. When you don't have anything to quote unquote do, and you have a vacant space of 3 to 4 days, you feel most unwanted and unloved. You want to be going out and doing stuff because we're a very doing oriented culture. So we relate to space or we relate to emptiness as if it's the absence of something. Now, there are cultures like Japanese culture here where emptiness is related to, is seen as a presence of something. Notice you go into an empty room, you can say there's nothing here, but you can go into an empty room and you can say, oh my God, there's so much beautiful space here. So, and there are various Zen and Taoistic poems that talk about how when you buy a clay pot, do you see that the money that you pay for the clay pot is for the material out of which the walls of the pot are made, right? That's what costs you the money. But do you see that the most useful and beautiful part of the pot is not the walls, is the space inside? So we have to start appreciating emptiness as a beautiful presence of spaciousness rather than as a problem. And it's an opening. The same thing with our social schedules. If you look at a room, what makes the room useful is not the walls, it is the space in between. If you walk through a door, imagine if you have to install a door, you have to pay for the door. And what is a door other than an empty space that you can walk through? For us to be able to look at spaces as gates to walk through to other states of experience and existence, to be able to see an empty schedule and not be addicted to doing and having, which makes our holiday extremely more more stressful. If we can just relax, you know, and start accepting ourselves. As I said, the most important thing that we have to do is heal our broken relationship with ourselves, because we have been raised with so much perfectionism, people constantly trying to make us a better version of ourselves. Do you see how many people have talked to us since you were a child, trying to make you better than who you are? And only a very few and handful of wise people have come our way and said, just be yourself. Very few people tell us to be ourselves. So many people tell us to be a better version of ourselves. And that is why this perfectionism gets ingrained. We always have to be making something better. And it can result in a tremendous amount of achievement and accomplishment. But notice what it's costing us. It's costing us the ability to enjoy this moment beautifully, and that can happen when we can thank the internal condemner and say, you know what? I know you're condemning me for not being more productive, but can you just relax, because I want to also enjoy life? And if you can start accepting ourselves with all our vulnerabilities, with all our faults and weaknesses, just fall in love with yourself this holiday season. Take this moment, regardless of how young or old you are. And I'm going to try it. I'm 58. I'm going to fall in love with myself all over again and say, you know what? I accept myself and love myself for who I am. And you will see that when we have dealt with the most challenging relationship with us, which ourselves, it becomes so much easier to deal with the other relationships in our life. And to turn to our uncles and aunts and cousins, and especially some of the most difficult ones. There are many parables in spiritual traditions that say God comes to you in many different forms. God comes to you sometimes like a barking dog that is annoying you. God comes to you sometimes like a squirrel that is, outside your door. You have to be able to exercise. And for those of you who are not religious, I'd say divinity or the sacred. You don't necessarily have to invoke God if you're not comfortable with it. The divinity, the sacred, the universe knocks on your door, sometimes in the form of a thunderstorm, sometimes in the form of a light drizzle, sometimes in the form of a beautiful snowfall, sometimes in the form of a barking dog and you can't sleep. And sometimes comes to you in the form of your racist Uncle Rob. And do you have the ability to be able to embrace the divinity in everybody? Because you have to understand, when you have relatives, especially with the younger generation, I have young students, there's always a generation gap. And as younger generations flower to a more enlightened attitude, they find their parental and grandparental generations completely intolerable. So I have like freshman generation people saying, I hate Thanksgiving because I have to go back and my parents are living like in an era that is long gone, and I just can't communicate with them. And this is a big challenge for us to understand that human beings are victims of their conditioning. Most of us have absorbed whatever has been taught to us. That enables us to have a little more compassion when you see and encounter relatives who hold attitudes that might be politically different, and all of that on the political spectrum, on the ethical spectrum, to understand that these are all beliefs and conditionings. And perhaps if you were born in that era, you would end up the same way. But it's great that you have been born in another era, so you can make it a game. I'm not just saying accept everything. Maybe you want to enter into a conversation where you can help some of your relatives who are not on the same page see a different angle. You can do that, but if you do that with love and you approach them with love, that conversation will go very differently than if you approach them with an attitude. So much of life is determined by the attitude we approach something with. The other day, I was talking to a friend of mine who's always unhappy in every job that he goes to. And I was helping him analyze what it is that he starts thinking of when he approaches his workplace on day one. And I could show him there are 3 or 4 things, attitudes that he's starting with, that bring him his unhappiness. And that is something we have to create. When we are unhappy or miserable in a situation, we are all usually looking outward and blaming the person outside, as the source, as the problem of our chat, as the source of our difficulties. And I want us to recognize that it's our attitude. If we can bring self-acceptance, that we accept ourselves, if we can drop our perfectionism, recognize that the whole world is on a journey, right? I cannot tell you, if you met me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you would probably have hated the kind of person I am. Well, you may still hate me today, but probably less so. It's amazing how much people can change. You yourself, look at all the beautiful changes you've gone through in a lifetime, how much your soul has matured. So if we can recognize that we're all souls at different stages of a journey, we're all like flowers at different stages of bloom, and we can open our hearts with compassion. If we bring compassion and non-serious attitude, the whole of life is a joke. It is hilarious. If you look at your, at the conversations at your Thanksgiving dinner table, whether it's going to be a Zoom Thanksgiving or in person, it's hilarious. If you were a comedian, you would be able to do a full-blown stand-up session for 30 minutes or 50 minutes just out of that, right? If you can bring a sense of humor, if you can bring compassion for yourself and for others, acceptance for yourself for others, lightheartedness, and any experience can become joyous. So recognize that it's where we are standing gives us a certain perspective. You know, we may say, I want to enjoy the peaks of the holiday season and I don't want the valleys. But then if you can start roasting some s'mores and dancing in those valleys, as Osho says, that valley itself has become a peak. So much of it is in what we bring to it. And transcendence is the key, is my final point. I want to leave you and say goodbye with this final point on transcendence. It's a concept that is known in the wisdom traditions. It's not a concept that we practice a lot in our life. What is the idea of transcendence? So normally we go between unhappiness and happiness. There are experiences that make us happy, and there are experiences that make us unhappy. And we're usually like a ping pong ball or a tennis ball going between unhappiness and unhappiness, or like a pendulum. What happens in transcendence is you begin to understand and you begin to become a watcher or a witnesser, somebody who can observe yourself feeling unhappy, somebody who can observe yourself feeling happy. So you watch and say, oh my God, I'm becoming unhappy, I'm becoming happy. When you start watching and observing, you will begin to recognize that both unhappiness and happiness are dependent on something outside. In other words, they are dependent upon an external condition being fulfilled, upon other people behaving in a certain way, upon everything going a certain way. When you outsource your inner state of consciousness to something outside and that determines how you feel, that is a outsourced. Transcendence is where, you see these as the two bases of the triangle. You move to the apex of the triangle. So you move here and you start going beyond happiness and unhappiness. You start rising above unhappiness and happiness. You can watch both of them, but you're not sucked into either of them. So transcendence is a tradition where you go beyond opposites. You go beyond love and hate. You accept everything that is there in you. So you go beyond perfection and you attain to a state of acceptance of being watching and witnessing. Folks, on that note, I want to wish each one of you a very happy Thanksgiving and a very happy holiday season. Our next webinar is going to be on the Sunday of Thanksgiving, where the topic we will be exploring is reclaiming your creative confidence, reclaiming the confidence in your creativity. Many of us don't see ourselves as creative people, yeah? And we need to awaken that creative spark. We were very creative as kids, but then somewhere down the line, we became conformists. And this is an ability to start celebrating the creativity that is still there within us. I'm very grateful personally to all of you who made time today. As in keeping with our tradition, I'm going to stay on for 5 minutes. I'm going to give you the ability to unmute yourself, and no pressure for you to stay. If you feel done, by all means, please feel free to leave the meeting anytime. But if you would like to unmute yourself, you are now allowed to unmute yourself if you want to make a comment, a question, or anything. Let's see if that did go through. And as I said, could somebody unmute themselves just to see if I did that right? No, I didn't. I'm sorry. I'll do this on the second attempt. And once again, if you need to leave, please, I don't want you to feel pressured to stay. The webinar is officially over, but this is just an opportunity